Hey YouTube, Ethan here. Today I wanted to talk about one of the most overpowered buildings in Oxygen Not Included, and in my opinion that is the Smart Battery. I'll give you an overview of why I think the Smart Battery is the most overpowered building and why it is so useful in the game. And I'm going to talk about how I like to use the Smart Battery, and the elements that I talk about will hopefully allow you to understand why, in my opinion, the Smart Battery is indeed the most overpowered building. Now, I think it's important to mention that my definition of overpowered is not necessarily something that creates the most power over other methods, or something that allows your duplicants to fly around the asteroid like a jetpack. My definition of overpowered is something that has compounding effects to help your colony grow and save resources. So there's definitely a legit argument that can be made for a lot of different buildings, and I can certainly see why other buildings would be considered to be the most overpowered, but I'm going to give my hot take on why I think the Smart Battery is the most useful. And like all of my beginner-friendly guides, this is going to include information that is tailored mostly towards new players in Oxygen Not Included and how to make the most use of it when you finally get it. Because there's a lot that the game doesn't tell you about how to use the Smart Battery, and that's something that you kind of learn through community forums or Reddit or YouTube videos like these. So if you're a new player, I'd love to hear your feedback in the comments after the video and let me know if you were able to learn something. And if you're a more experienced player, as always, I'd love to hear your feedback or criticisms as well. And let me know why you like the Smart Battery or why other buildings are better than the Smart Battery. I definitely want to talk about it with you guys, so let me know in the comments what you think and if my opinion about the Smart Battery is on point. So before we discuss the Smart Battery, let's discuss for the new player how to get the Smart Battery and what you'll need. So the Smart Battery is on the third tier of your power research tree, and as you can see, you're going to need advanced research to unlock the Smart Battery before you can get this. So it is very important to go for advanced research down in colony development before you attempt to go for the Smart Battery. And that also means you're going to need a supercomputer in your colony somewhere. So before we get into talking more about the Smart Battery, let's compare all three batteries in Oxygen Not Included so we can get an idea of why this one is just so much more superior. The standard battery, which is likely the first one that you'll build in the game, has a storage capacity of 10 kilojoules. Now, just as a quick note, kilojoules refers to the storage medium of the battery. It is largely irrelevant otherwise, so just think of joules as like your gas tank. But instead of gallons or liters, it's measured in kilojoules. So with a capacity of 10 kilojoules, that is quite low, but it's more than enough you need for anything early on in the game when you're first starting out. However, this battery has a leakage of 1000 joules per cycle. That means that if this battery starts out full, and if you have no power consumers at all in your base, within 10 cycles, it will be completely depleted of energy. Now that doesn't sound too bad, but it's certainly not ideal compared to what we can get with something like the Jumbo Battery. The Jumbo Battery has a power capacity of 40 kilojoules, which is 4 times as much as the standard battery. However, it also has double the amount of leakage at 2 kilojoules per cycle. Even though that the leakage has doubled over the standard battery, because it has a power capacity of 40 kilojoules, that means that this battery will completely deplete if there are no power consumers within 20 cycles. So this is a lot more desirable than having a standard battery, and you can also store more energy. However, one thing to consider, if your power requirements are very high and you're still on the hamster wheel like this starting colony is, they're going to be producing energy up to 2 kilojoules per cycle that's being depleted for absolutely no reason. So I don't recommend going on the Jumbo Battery until you have a automated source of power generation. Otherwise, your duplicants are essentially just wasting time running on the hamster wheel like they are here, and 2 kilojoules of that energy that they're producing is going to absolutely nothing. So for that reason, I recommend staying on the standard battery until you have your coal generators up and running, which is fairly early anyways. However, this small optimization is not game-breaking, so in a sense it is largely subjective if you choose to do this or not. You might prefer to have the Jumbo Battery just so your duplicants can spend time doing other things, but you still lose 2 kilojoules per cycle of energy that they spend creating, so it is not desirable by any means. Now let's take a look at the Smart Battery. The Smart Battery has a power capacity of 20 kilojoules. This is only half that of the jumbo battery. However, its power leak is only 400 joules per cycle. This is significantly less than the jumbo battery and the standard battery. This means that a full charge, which don't forget is half that of the jumbo battery, will last 50 cycles until it's fully depleted, if there are no power consumers. So not only will the smart battery deplete far slower than the jumbo battery and the standard battery, but it also produces less than half of the heat that the other two produce. That's an insane advantage over these two other storage mediums. The biggest disadvantage to the smart battery is that the smart battery requires refined metal to produce. This means that you're going to need a metal refinery or a rock crusher in order to produce the necessary materials to build the smart battery. However, the benefits far outweigh the sidetracking that you'll have to do to get the material to build the smart battery. So now let's talk about why the smart battery is so overpowered. The smart battery has a unique characteristic that is not available in the standard or the jumbo battery, and that's the automation. The automation details can be accessed in the status tab using the logic activation parameters pop-up. By connecting the smart battery to your power generators, you allow the smart battery to control when these coal generators turn off and on. This may not sound like a big deal, but this is a compounding effect on your entire playthrough. Unlike this coal generator that is not connected to anything via automation, will continue to run and burn through resources even though there are no significant power drains in this entire electrical system. There's literally nothing running beyond this jumbo battery consuming power, and yet this coal generator is still producing 600 watts of power for absolutely no reason. Now, I do have the auto sweeper here, but that's usually not unlocked until later in the game. So in a realistic scenario, your duplicants will be tasked with feeding this coal generator more coal every time this threshold for request is met. This is a huge waste of resources. And this is where the compounding effect comes into play with the smart battery. Because your duplicants have to spend time loading this coal generator, it means that they have less time doing other things, like expanding your base. It also means that you're going to have to more aggressively dig out coal in order to continue to feed this coal generator. So your duplicants will be loading the coal generator more often, digging out coal more often and delivering it to the coal generator, which is taking away from production in other areas of your colony that could be used for expanding, such as food expansion, or finding other more renewable sources of power and assisting in the transformation of your base to newer power sources. The smart battery, on the other hand, will not demand these coal generators to work if they are hooked up via automation wire, unless the parameters on the low threshold are met. This means that if this full battery depleted to 20%, it would command these coal generators to turn on and recharge itself to 70%. So in essence, just by building the smart battery, you have already saved your duplicants a lot of travel time coming here to load the smart batteries full of coal when it's not producing any power for any power consumers within your base. And it will save coal because it is a precious resource. Unless you have a hydro farm set up, coal is non-renewable. So eventually you're going to run out of it. And this is a common problem that new players face if they get far enough into the game without encountering other problems first. Now, zooming out a little bit, this is, I think, the ideal way to use a smart battery. I'm oversimplifying it here for the explanation, but I will show you how it's working on a much larger scale shortly. In this example here, I have 5 smart batteries hooked up to 5 different methods of power generators. As you can see, they are all connected by a heavy watt wire. For the purposes of this video, I'm actually going to sever the wire that connects it to the conductive wire because that's not part of the example. Essentially, what this means is that when these power generators are commanded to turn on by their respective smart battery, they will fill the entire electrical grid, and each power generator will fill all of the smart batteries on that same network. If we take a look at the automation, each smart battery is connected to its own source of power generation. This means that if the smart battery commands the coal generators to turn on, the coal generators will fill the entire network. And likewise with hydrogen, if the smart battery commands the hydrogen generators to turn on, the hydrogen generators will fill the entire network. Also notice how each source of power generation only has one smart battery hooked up to it. Because smart batteries command their power generators when to turn off and on, having more than one smart battery connected to the same power source is redundant, and quite frankly, I think it's a waste. If your base continues to expand and you're struggling with power, the proper way to deal with it is not to build more smart batteries to hold more power, but it is to increase your method of power generation. This means that you can add more hydrogen generators if you need the smart battery on the hydrogen network to fill up quicker. Having more than one smart battery on the same power generation network is not going to solve the demand that your base has for power consumption. You solve the demand by building more generators, not by adding more batteries. So let's go over why having each battery on its own power generation network is key to having a successful base. Each source of power, such as coal, wood, natural gas, hydrogen, or petroleum, has different scarcities and rarities depending on which asteroid that you're playing on. Typically on the Terra asteroid, which is what most new players start out on, you'll always have abundance of coal early on, or if you're starting on a similar asteroid, you'll have plenty of arbor trees to make plenty of wood. In either case, these materials don't provide a lot of power. The coal generators only make 600 watts and the wood burners only make 300 watts. So you definitely want to get off those as soon as possible. Natural gas can be a fully renewable resource from natural gas geysers, and same thing with hydrogen. And petroleum is more or less infinite as well, because you can have oil wells, which I just did a video on, so go check that out. You can use oil wells, and you'll have plenty of starting oil within your oil biome to make yourself petroleum, so you can use the petroleum generator for dozens of cycles before you start to get low. However, what you want to keep in mind is that geysers and vents typically go offline. And during those periods of time, you'll have no power at all. Even if you have a very large quantity of, let's say, natural gas saved up, it's likely that by the time your geyser is not dormant anymore, you will have run out of the natural gas that you've saved, especially if you've gotten into the mid or late game where your base power requirements are very high. So it's critical to never rely on only one source of power throughout the entire game. You'll always want to have as many resources available as possible. So because you have these rarities of different consumables in mind, you'll want to have each smart battery on different priorities set to when they turn off and on. Let's go over what I mean. If we start with the petroleum smart battery, the high threshold is 100% and the low threshold is 80%. This means that when this battery drops to 80%, because it's connected by automation wire, it will command these petroleum generators to turn on, thus refilling this battery to 100%, while also at the same time refilling all the batteries to 100% as well. This is because the smart battery holds 20 kilojoules of power, which means that when this is full, it is likely that the rest of them will eventually sync up as well. Having your battery synced up is not a requirement to make this work efficiently, but it's something that's likely to happen over the course of the game. Now let's say I have hydrogen on my map as well, but I don't want to use quite as much of it as I do the petroleum. This may be for various reasons, but for this scenario, we're just going to pretend that the petroleum is my primary source of power, and the hydrogen is my second, natural gas being the third, wood and coal being my last resorts. So once my petroleum generators are commanded to turn on at 80%, this battery will fill up to 100% because that is my high threshold. Now because hydrogen is my second source of power, I have my hydrogen generator battery set to 70% low threshold. This means that if the petroleum generators are not quite keeping up, and the status of this battery falls below 70%, then the hydrogen generators will then kick on until the battery reaches 100%. So I will have the petroleum and the hydrogen generators turned on at the same time. To take it one step farther, if my power consumption in my base is so high that I drop below 60%, then my natural gas generators will turn on until the battery becomes 100% full. So all three of my major power producers, petroleum, hydrogen, and natural gas, will be running until the batteries reach 100%. I have a similar setup for my last resorts. My wood burner and my coal generators are set to 40 and 20 low thresholds respectively. So that means that these power sources will only turn on once the batteries are at 40% and 20%. These will only run in case I have a huge spike in demand and I need to fill my batteries before my base dies entirely. Because coal and wood are the least desirable resources, I have the respective batteries set at only 70% max capacity. They will still fill to 100% because the other smart batteries on the same network will continue to feed into these smart batteries as well. But the difference is that the smart batteries connected to coal and wood will stop at 70%, and the other three major power producers will continue to work until their respective thresholds of 100% are met. So I hope this wasn't too confusing and it makes sense. To recap, you want to have your most readily available and renewable resource to be the power source that you use most often to power your colony. And you definitely want to have more than one backup, so in case your primary resource fails, you have backups to take the load on. And it's always good to have your very first legacy power generators still online, such as coal and wood, in order to pick up the slack when there's very high spikes in demand. So let's take a look at how this works in a much more mature base that has been running for 750 cycles, and how the power network all ties into one another. So if we go to the power overlay, you can see that my entire network is connected via heavy watt conductive wire. I have multiple power generators, like the hydrogen that is coming from my electrolyzers. I have 8 coal generators, 10 natural gas generators, and 5 petroleum generators. So aside from the wood burner, I'm using all the same methods that I just showed in the tutorial. I'm going to take you through my order of priorities. My hydrogen generators, there are only 3 of them, and in this scenario, I'm producing an excessive amount of hydrogen that I'm trying to store for later on. Now I realize that there is an infinite storage method, but I prefer not to use those. I like to use the standard gas reservoirs. We'll just ignore this giant block of gas reservoirs for now. The smart battery that is connected to the hydrogen generators is set at 85% low threshold. This means that these hydrogen generators are essentially running at all times using all of the excess hydrogen that is not being fed into the gas reservoirs. So these 3 generators are my primary source of power, even though they will realistically never be able to keep up with the demand that my base has. The natural gas network is set to turn on at 70% low threshold, and these 10 generators are my second most commonly used power generators on this asteroid. This is because I have not 1, but 3 natural gas geysers. However, by sheer bad luck, they all go dormant at exactly the same time. So my rationale is that I have more than enough natural gas to power my entire base, or at least most of it, that I have these turning on the most frequently aside from the hydrogen that is being produced. However, because they all go dormant at exactly the same time, I need backup methods. And that's where these petroleum generators come in. These 5 petroleum generators, which are connected to one smart battery, turn on at 70% also. I have some extra automation hooked up here, and I'll explain that in a bit. But these 5 petroleum generators produce a combined 10,000 watts of power. This is generally able to run most of my base, most of the time. However, this is a very large base, and there are spikes in demand periodically that I need to account for. Especially at a critical moment, like when my natural gas generators are offline, I need to have another resource beyond this in order to satisfy my power demands. And this is where my coal generators come in. The smart battery for my coal generators is set to turn on at 10%, but it only charges the battery until 50%. This covers major spikes within my base. As you can see right now, it does not need to work at all because the hydrogen and the petroleum is taking care of power requirements that are within my base. However, as you just saw, there was a spike in demand, and it required all the coal generators to turn on all at the same time. So when there's a spike in demand, these are able to come online and help out my petroleum generators. Now, arguably, I could just build more petroleum generators and have it take care of my base, but keep in mind that that also requires duplicate time for your oil refinery, which may not be something that you want to spend a lot of time on if you're trying to rapidly expand your colony, because the more petroleum generators you have, the more crude oil you will need to convert into petroleum. And this is where this AND gate comes in, which is something that I will explain for the purpose of this video since it's here. So I have 6 gas generators here that store natural gas as a backup, in addition to the chambers that the geysers are in. These 2 bottom reservoirs feed my gas range, so I can maintain my colony's food resources. And the top 4 reservoirs handle the extra storage that's needed for my natural gas generators. This is essentially a buffer, and you can make it as big or as small as you need, but a buffer is very handy to have, especially when you're getting natural gas from various different sources, like your oil refinery. Essentially, my strategy is to never have these pumps turn off if there is natural gas inside these chambers. And if I don't have these buffers to have a storage medium for the natural gas before it's used by the generators, the gas pumps will shut off and it will create a bottleneck for the generators. The gas reservoirs also have automation. When the low threshold is met on these gas reservoirs, it sends a green signal, which goes to various different AND gates. At the end, it takes the path of one AND gate up to an AND gate up to the petroleum generators. And essentially what this is doing is telling these petroleum generators that they can turn on when the smart battery has reached its low threshold, which is quite often. But the secondary requirement is that I'm completely depleted out of natural gas. So this is an overly complicated scenario, that I sort of did just for fun. And like I said, it is not needed for you to make it overly complicated like this, but I definitely encourage you to play around with automation. Sometimes it can also be fun to just experiment with different techniques and see how they benefit or not benefit your playthrough. So I hope this was a good example of why the smart battery is so overpowered and why I believe it is the most overpowered building in Oxygen Not Included. What this really does is allow you to manage your resources better and allow you to have your duplicants freed up for other tasks, such as expanding your colony or doing other things that are more important within your base. In the case of the smart battery that's connected to the petroleum generators, having these petroleum generators not run while I have excessive amounts of natural gas allows my duplicants to do other things rather than run the oil refineries. And it also helps my duplicants not have to come and fill these storage bins full of coal if my coal consumption is not very high, which is generally the case when my natural gas generators are running at full capacity. So if you're a new player, I hope to hear your feedback about anything that you may have learned in this video. And if you're a more experienced player, feel free to let me know in the comments if you disagree with my opinion about the smart batteries, and if you think there's something that is more useful than the smart battery in the game. Personally, I can see you making the argument for Atmos suits. They are also incredibly powerful, and I think they would probably be my number 2 in the tier rankings because it allows your duplicants to work pretty much anywhere within a certain limit. But I believe that power is the backbone of a colony, and without power, your Atmos suits couldn't function, and you wouldn't have oxygen to fill your Atmos suits with. So let me know in the comments below, and let's talk about it. I'd love to hear your feedback. And until next time, I'm Ethan. I'll talk to you later.